Hey everyone, I am Noctis Corvus, but you can call me Noctis, and today I'm bringing you different aesthetics as characters. Now, I would normally introduce the three here and kind of give an overview of what's coming up whilst we start on the first character. But instead we're going to skip that bit today, because it would be a bit of a spoiler almost for the last one. The last one is something that I don't want to explain at the moment, since I don't even know where to begin with it, and I didn't expect it either when I was planning for this video. It was definitely a later addition to the plans that I couldn't have seen coming. I will just say, I asked a friend for a suggestion, and immediately had to question why I did that, knowing said friend and their track record of suggestions. But I will introduce the overall idea. Today we will be drawing 3 character designs, with each one being based off a different aesthetic that I've chosen, or had as a suggestion by friends. They will just be the characters too. Maybe minimal or simple backgrounds where they fit, yet I won't be including a scene for each character. Who knows, it may be an idea I can go back to later, but these are more for the characters and the character designs, as that is something I enjoy too, despite the fact that so far on the channel I've done more full illustrations. I do enjoy a good bit of character design every now and then, like a little treat. But without further ado, let's introduce our first aesthetic here. Cottagecore as an aesthetic focuses on an ideal view of more rural life. To introduce it simply, there are influences from the Romantic era, a movement in the 18th century, where people began creating art, writings, and so forth, with the idea that people should reconnect with nature and the natural world, and this was really in response to the rapid changes of the Industrial Revolution going on at the time. A brief research into cottagecore and the ideas behind it also kind of indicates that the motives for cottagecore are similar to that of the Romantic movement, where people tend to idealise a simpler life in response to modern day and its responsibilities. Now, when I was looking into it as a fashion and a style, there were sort of a few common threads found. The first, flowing dresses and blouses. It's a staple of a fashion as it is commonly described as a hyper-feminine style. I actually considered drawing male characters for this video, yet couldn't find anything cottagecore in a more masculine presentation, as most of the references were focused on traditionally feminine details like the dresses and longer hair. The dresses weren't the only feature. They were the most spoken of whenever reading up on it, then being the easiest pieces to tie into history and such influences. Yet there had also been a focus on anything second-hand or vintage to meet the aesthetics focus on reusing stuff and sustainability. Other looks then included a lot of jumpers and cardigans or anything knitted, as it could be made, knitting and crochet being common hobbies for the style, alongside things like baking and other handicrafts. Otherwise, there were a few outfits that included printed t-shirts too. Those usually have a print relating to nature or a small forest animal. Commonly a fox. I actually saw a lot of foxes. Yet these were seen fewer times than those with the blouse. The t-shirt, I mean. Most of the looks did have a blouse or some sort of shirt as like an underlayer. Often they would layer something on top then, but it would be a shirt underneath. With a t-shirt, a t-shirt was also layered, but they were less common to find. Now, I do want to note here that there are criticisms for all aesthetics and styles. I'm so sorry if you hear my dog in the background. I'm not going to be going into the criticisms here, unless it's relevant to the drawing of the style or whatever I'm doing. Also, I already feel like I'm writing an essay when writing the script, so I really don't want to get into the fine details of each issue and complaint and go into those levels. Besides, it's often a fine line. Mention one, then it leads into another, and then the script becomes overly negative when this is all just for fun. And people do enjoy the style, so I don't want to be bringing it down, when it's really something that I've looked into for this video. But, staying on track, cottagecore as a style tends to focus more on natural colours, I found. There are a lot of browns or greens to it, or other faded and worn colours. Sometimes these can include more pastel colours, yet I focus more on the natural side of the palette. In places. I made the choice to include some stronger ones too, that were seen in a few references. Mainly the yellow, since it complemented the piece rather well and it still fit with the rest of the palette, despite the fact that it isn't one of the more common colours seen in it. Well, yellow is, but it's often more muted and not this bright. A lot of the colours tend to come from more natural dyes that give the more muted colours, so I took a bit of creative liberty with the vibrant tone. I also made the choice to incorporate some small details that relate to other values of the style, which may have affected the overall colour palette. See, there aren't too many small details in this style. There are prints and there are patterns, but the buttons more commonly would be buttons from what I was seeing. At least, it's all I saw. But with my character, I gave them little fruit and a vegetable buttons, mainly because a lot of cottagecore does have themes of gardening and growing your own food, or making it from scratch, like baking bread or having a little fruit garden for yourself. It's really all to do with ideas of self-sustainability, and the buttons were a little nod to that. Otherwise, on the hat, I added a little fox charm alongside the flowers and leaves, only because I kept seeing images of sheep or foxes, and the fox won my challenge for which pin I would include, as I thought it was cute. Either would have fit, either the fox or sheep, but I did end up seeing slightly more foxes. I also added the mushrooms since they were present in a lot of cottagecore wallpapers and patterns. Since I wasn't just drawing influence from outfits, I kind of wanted to see more what the overall aesthetic was, including what would be considered a cottagecore wallpaper, for like a phone background or something. Those patterns is why I later added the grid pattern. I don't know the exact name of it since I've heard like 10 words for the same pattern, yet all of them differ slightly, and whether that be by one line or two. To the skirt, since those sorts of patterns were also common, with them historically being made of more natural materials, like wool or linen, which is another theme with the clothes of the fashion. Now, I think that summarises some of the influences for the style itself. Also crosses off the colour palette I chose and some of the smaller details. Yet, I haven't addressed the pose. See, I didn't want to do the environments for these drawings. These are all strictly focused on small colour backgrounds and the character itself. Like, I wanted this character to be cottagecore because that is how she looks. Otherwise, I chose to give the pose a sense of motion. I knew the other two would be stationary and have a lot of images I see of cottagecore include elements of wind and the breeze. It's why I had the hair being caught in the wind and the skirt flowing with the same motion. It did end up a little odd, yet I personally put that down to the negative space left under the skirt, which doesn't bother me too much. It may also be because of the legs, since they can't be seen under the skirt and the way they move, but there wasn't really a way around that. The style has a lot of skirts and a lot of long skirts. The shorter ones were present, but they were rarer to see. And also, the style is kind of synonymous with long summer dresses. Now, last week I mentioned I had this video in the works and I didn't know when it would be out, yet that was mainly with the third style. Cottagecore was a style I kind of knew I wanted to do since it is a name I've heard around a bit. It's never a style I would wear, I'll admit that much. It's way too bright for me since I prefer wearing darker colours. Yet it's simply a word I hear a lot and others are aware of, which made me want to include it here first. It's also one of those that I just find visually very cute, so wanted to explore a bit more. Though this one was done first since it wasn't something I have specifically done before. I've incorporated elements of the style into characters and seen it about here and there, but never really looked into what the aesthetic about is specifically or dedicated a character to the style. I mean, the next aesthetic is one that I've done quite a bit, as I've commonly done it for my cast of characters, that I've drawn in that style again and again, just as messing around with their designs and having a bit of fun with it. I will say that I do want to do more of these too, so if you have any aesthetics you'd want to see, comment on them and I will likely look into them to see what I can do. We may end up moving quite quickly here in the audio for some parts, since I have a lot to say for each, and yet limited time as I don't want the video to end up like 2 hours. Each aesthetic is about 10 minutes each, I want to say, and naturally I have to fit in quite a bit in that time frame. So with that said, let's move away from the flowers and the cottages and into a style almost synonymous with the opposite. Concrete jungles, bustling cities, and neon lights. These are really the main core of the cyberpunk aesthetic and genre. Now, where cottagecore looks to nature and sees an ideal alternative for how the world is, cyberpunk is often tied into more modern ideals, with some sort of challenge or commentary on an element of it. Usually this means introducing a narrative seeking to change some aspect that people are unsatisfied with, or welcoming people to also challenge whatever element of modern day it is that they're looking at in that story. And these usually will include dialing said concern up slightly, or taking it further in the future. And none of this is new. Cyberpunk as a genre is an idea that is commonly thought to have formed around the 1980s or 1970s, where the themes really began to come together through different forms of media, mainly being seen as a subcategory to the sci-fi genre, and later it ties itself into dystopian genres. See, cottagecore seeks to almost escape aspects of modern day, as I've already touched on, by looking back in an ideal sense, using the past and history as a source of inspiration. Cyberpunk does the opposite more commonly than not. It's really meant to be anti-escapist. The narratives found within the media in the genre are about confronting some part of today that, as I've mentioned, people aren't satisfied with, and offering a warning tale as to why it should change. It's why cyberpunk is often seen in dystopian settings, as a core of the genre is about technological advancements, often indicating that the stories in the genre may be part of the future. Yet it pairs itself with another sort of collapse that people are meant to find somewhat uncomfortable or unsettling. In recent years, I have sort of seen this via narratives against a larger corporation, for example. Now, it is also meant as a subgenre of punk movements too. There are common themes that are similar to punk, even if visually it draws off other sources. Though whether the punk element comes through or not is really up to the presentation and source of media. I know I've seen some things that claim to be cyberpunk that sort of fail on the punk element to some degree, and it instead focuses on the technology and how cool this thing would be. Now, before I go too far into all of that, as I said, I really don't want to go too far into the criticisms. I want to move into it as a style, since right now I've spoken of it as a genre or as a setting. I understand that the style is meant to tie in with the genre, yet it as a style is what's really relevant here, since it's what I'm doing in the video. The colours of cyberpunk are quite simple. There are your blacks, your metals, and your neons. That's kind of true for most of the images I saw and had been referencing, though I don't include much metal here, and instead stuck more to the darker colours and the neons. Mainly darker colours for shading purposes, since it's really hard to shade, like, pure black in an outfit. So I instead kept it more to the darker tones within the palette. And yes, this palette really applies for both people in clothes and all that, and also the environments. I mean, cyberpunk is often thought of in spanning cities, where most of the colour comes through neon signs or advertisements. with buildings otherwise plain and grey. Hence the neon. The neon breaks this up and adds a dash of colour and atmospheric lighting more often than not. In terms of visual influences, a lot of references pull from aesthetics of techwear. So something I commonly saw were the baggy trousers with lots of belts and pockets. I really should have added more to my character in those terms. Originally I had, yet chose not to since it would have been awkward with the pose too, and ended up visually cluttered. Though another staple, long and big coats. Something bulky and long, or just something long. Otherwise, I had drawn a shorter but thicker jacket with pockets and zippers too. However, that entire version of the drawing got scrapped in its entirety, since the long coat was more common to see and added more visual interest to the piece I found. The first version was also just off in some way that didn't sit well with me, so I chose to restart it into what you're seeing. But besides those, I also saw a lot of form-fitting underlayers. This was somewhat true for the trousers too, but really it was far more common to see the opposite. I chose the thicker ones in that space though, since it was close to techwear and it had been interesting under the long coat rather than having form-fitting trousers under the coat as well. Yet a common thread for form-fitting elements had been tight and cropped tops, or at least those that fit the form. It wasn't all over though, more just a majority I'd seen, as a lot of them did include full-length tops as well as those that still clung to the figure. The common thread had really been that they were form-fitting and would be a thinner fabric, if real, to account for the thicker outer layers. It's why I ended up adding the sheerish section over the stomach. It was kind of my middle ground too, as there were a few images with various textures that I wanted to represent, though those were the minority. Though, moving on, the pose wasn't anything specific. I wanted them posing and chose to have them sitting since I knew it wouldn't have an environment. It partially looked odd in previous sketches, yet the longer coat almost fixed that, since I let the fabric fall. Though I did almost choose to continue as if they had something to sit on in the piece, and I almost bunched the fabric around them as if the coat was following how they were sitting. I am glad I chose to let it fall though. I did spend too long scrolling through references of people sitting to try and gather the right bundle of casual and posing without it being anything strange though. I could make a series of videos on the strange references out there for poses, but that rant will be spared for another day. I have time left, yet do have another character I'll have to talk on soon, and that one is a wildcard in of themselves. So, moving swiftly on, I knew I wanted to include Cyberpunk in the list when I began to consider this video weeks ago. It's just something that I enjoy to pull from visually, since it usually lets me experiment with lighting in the piece. Granted, it isn't the only source I will pull from, but it's often more fun for referencing light more than anything. It's also one of the few styles I can just name whenever I'm asked to. I have a father who loves sci-fi as a genre, with cyberpunk often as a subgenre, which means I've sort of been passively exposed to it alongside the rest of sci-fi since I was young. He definitely has a stronger interest in it, but it does mean cyberpunk is one of those few styles I could actually name if I was put on the spot. Cough cough, art friend. That will make sense very soon here. I do also want to note here that this script still hasn't taught me how to spell aesthetic, hence why I keep saying style too. I'm so glad that no one actually sees the script though, since I have made up some creative ways of spelling it too. I thought that by now I would have been able to spell it, but it's being awkward, so if I misspell it in the title of the video, no I didn't. No I didn't. I don't even know why I struggle so much with the word. I mean, I've tried for years to learn how to spell it, and yeah, it's one of those that I just give up with and make up after halfway through. I think I've once doubled the word in one spelling by accident. Awkward, ironically, was a word I used to do that with. Then I don't know, I just kind of woke up one day able to spell it without realising. So who knows, maybe I will keep doing these videos and eventually just be able to do it one day. Today is not that day though, I am afraid. All of that said, we are moving swiftly on to the next aesthetic. Now, I need to explain this one. I really ought to take a moment here to begin with how we ended up here, after things like Cyberpunk and Cottagecore. I mean, I honestly couldn't have even predicted this. I am not someone who knows many names for aesthetics or styles, and I began to draw a bit of a blank with the third. And yes, rule of three. The three just felt right to include, and the two needed a third. So I did what I often do, and brought it to one of my friends. A friend, mind you, who is more informed about various aesthetics, and I felt would have a good suggestion. We joke about his personal style, but they often can name far more than me, when it comes to aesthetics. Yeah, personal message to said friend if you see this. I meant a wider one, maybe goth or grunge, something like that. Also, if you do see this, how I haven't told you anything about this. But he instead responded to me in record time with this. Whimsigoth. Before this video, I have seen the style without realising it, yet never even heard the term, so had been working from a complete square one on this. For context, he is the art friend I've mentioned a fair amount on this channel already. He's the one I'm considering nicknames for at the moment, especially if he continues to pull things like this whenever I ask him for themes. I'm not actually mad at him. In truth, I didn't know what I expected him to come out with, but this wasn't on the list, yet alone high up. Either way, he sent me 2 patterns that summarise the style, and I got to researching what it actually was. Now, Whimsigoth is one where the name says it all. Take a bit of whimsy, mix in parts goth, and you're undoubtedly left with Whimsigoth. Being said, I did struggle to find much about it. I found plenty of visuals, which I suppose was the key part, but not the background to the aesthetic or the ideas to it. Cottagecore and Cyberpunk, for example, come with their own ideas about life and how it could or should be. It can be just a style, but it also bleeds into many more areas, like TV shows and books. For Whimsigoth, I struggled to find any of this. There were shows that were described as Whimsigoth, and movies and music, just like Cottagecore and Cyberpunk, yet nothing as to why they were what they said they were. But I will do my best to share whatever I did find. Its modern popularity is often credited to TikTok for bringing attention to the style and sharing the ideas of it with people and content based off the imagery. That is in terms for both interior design aspects, the more common references I found more of, and how-to videos of styling an outfit in this style. Though the term is more from the 80s and 90s to describe moody aesthetics that still have a playful side to them, the whimsy part of the goth, and is a term coined by Evan Collins. Now, one key thing I noticed quite early in looking was the layering. Any Whimsigoth outfit will have an aspect of layering in it. There is a lot of emphasis on layering basically anything. Each reference layered something in a different way. For example, there would be mesh tops layered over each other or a solid top below a mesh top. There would also be mismatched layers of skirts in some. Others would be layers of belts, layers of necklaces, and anything. I also saw some looks where people layered tights below ankle socks to cover that basis. Though people also included corsets into some of the styles, as there doesn't appear to be a limit on what can be layered. Anything to add visual interest. The only thing I didn't see someone layer in a look was shoes, but that one makes sense. I wouldn't actually know how you'd begin to layer shoes. Though within the layering, there also is a mix of different fabrics and patterns. I've already mentioned mesh, that is a common one. Though Other key fabrics include lace, ribbons, leather, and velvet. Which, the first few, I understand, but if anyone wears velvet, props to you. I cannot stand the texture of the stuff. Besides the actual clothes, there is also a large focus on jewellery. A lot of the looks I saw would have necklaces, mainly multiple and more, earrings, specifically statement earrings, rings, bracelets, anything that they could layer really. I mean, necklaces would commonly be tiered, and bracelets, they may have one or two. Rings were more having a few on their hand if they were larger, but smaller ones could also be paired together on one finger. Looking back at the drawing, I really should have added a few more pieces of jewellery. I did consider another necklace, maybe, yet ultimately didn't, as I forgot, quite simply. And it looked better without. Besides, I feel like I made up for it with the belts and the bracelets to sort of cover that aspect of the style. Now, I also mentioned layering patterns. There were a few patterns seen across the style, yet one definitely took the title of the main one. It was this pattern with the sun and moon on it. The one with the heraldry sun and moon. I at least think that's its name. I tried to look into it and Google its name, so do correct me if I'm wrong. But I chose ultimately to draw more off the moon in the end. I had seen slightly more of it and had fun with it. I also didn't want to copy looks offline. I had seen this Whimsigoth mesh top with the sun specifically on it, and I did consider including it, yet that was something that ended up removed in the sketching phase, as I would have been copying that element. Though then the sun would have been in the background, yet it would have been too busy, so I really ended up just going with the moon. This was a choice I didn't mind too much. The moon was still key to the main pattern, and there are themes of celestial imagery throughout the style, so the sun wasn't mandatory. Also, looks I saw had focused on one out of the pair too, so it felt alright to go with. It is something I considered going back and adding though. I never do, since I like the moon aspect through it all. I did include a little nod to the sun on the necklace. It is a bit of a simpler style though. Now, the final bit to touch on with this style is the colour palette of the imagery. This style sees a lot of stronger tones. There's the blues and the purples, a lot of purple, and a dash of red in some references. I don't include the red here as it wasn't going to fit the piece. I also saw it less commonly in different references I looked at, so ultimately did just go with the blues and the purples. Some references I saw also included muted aspects of green, or other almost natural tones, but those became accents mainly in the bracelets since they were only small additions. For the most part, I stuck to the blues and the purples. I actually, in the end, had fun with this one. It's where I get to indulge in these stronger blues and purples, and yet they're really some of my favourite colours to work with. And I suppose that is why I will be making these videos. I want to do this more to explore different routes of inspiration for future ideas I may have. I do want to introduce more things as characters here, so it is only fitting I continue to explore and learn about the different aesthetics that I otherwise would nod at and continue on as before. I suppose this style is part of it. I began with two I had familiarity with and have drawn before, or drawn on before. Only for my friend to completely introduce something I've never heard of. And don't worry, I am already looking out for future aesthetics for these videos. One of my sisters actually gave me one not too long ago that has been added to a list, since at the moment I am just developing a list that I see around, and eventually I will get round to them. I hope. And if I don't, then it's not the worst thing in the world, it'll just remain on the list for a possible future reference. Yet, with all of that said, we have come up to the end of the video. Thank you for making it this far, and I hope you've enjoyed the different characters created here today. If you do have any suggestions for future aesthetics to turn into characters, please comment them below, and I hope you have a wonderful day. I certainly hope to see you next time.